Hello, good evening, everyone, and good morning to Teddy, his nickname. Hi, Teddy. Good morning to you.
Hello. Good evening to you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you as well, and thanks for joining. I'm sure that students are going to be benefited a lot today. And is it okay to call you Teddy, your
Of course.
nickname? Okay, great. So hello, everyone, and good evening to all of you. And thanks for joining our webinar this evening. And we will start with Teddy's introduction. You can see Teddy, a lot of students have joined from one school in one group, and then there are other participants. And we are also recording today's session so that we can share this with larger group, through social media networks and channels. So I hope it's okay to record the session, Teddy.
Of course.
Okay, great. So hello everyone again. I will just first introduce Teddy. His formal name is Theodore Gercken. He's a sophomore at Hamilton College. In high school, he was a state champion and national finalist in extemporaneous speaking and served as the chairman of the Libertarian Youth Caucus, among other roles in the Libertarian Party. In both positions, he built research and writing skills that he took into college, where he is currently researching the life cycle of third parties in two-party systems. And today we are going to deep dive into the benefits of early research for the high schoolers and the kind of topics that we are going to cover today, mostly about his personal journey and how did he get into academic research, and we would get to know what he thinks about the benefits of early involvement in research, the power of research in college applications, because there are a lot of young students listening to this conversation. And so what are the advantages if you start early, especially when you are applying to college, and also getting started from ideas to publication. How do you start? How do you end? And then what are some of the way of overcoming challenges and advice for aspiring student researchers? And then we will take some questions from the participants. Is that all right? Okay, Terry, shall we
Yeah, of course.
start the questions? Yeah. So first question is, what motivated you to begin engaging in academic research? What specific skills have you acquired through your research experiences that you find most valuable?
Yeah. So in high school, whenever I was doing homework or sitting in a class or participating in an extracurricular, I always took sort of a running list of basically just notes on, my thought processes of, whatever was sort of coming out of the experience. If it was homework, maybe additional questions I had about the reading, or class things that sparked my curiosity, or if it was an extracurricular projects that seemed fun to engage in. And, to some extent, these notes became sort of this very long, unwieldy document. But somewhere in sort of sophomore year, when I was looking back at this and trying to, put my past self in conversation with my current self, I started to notice a lot of patterns in terms of what was catching my attention in, classes as diverse as chemistry and government, whether I was, on the debate team and extracurriculars or serving the Libertarian Party. All of sort of the notes of what I was interested in, what I wanted to explore more, the things, that I wanted to go find articles about, were all centering around, a few very particular subjects. And for me, that ended up being, party politics in the way that political opportunity structures affect sort of political realities. But the important thing was understanding that, despite sort of this, very diverse array of things that I was, engaged in, and diverse array of things that I was interested in, there were, a few things that I, found that I was really passionate about, and that, everything else, continued to tie back to. And so, when I realized this sort of at the beginning of sophomore year, and for me, this is sort of the beginning of COVID. And so I had, a lot of time on my hands to sort of engage in research. I started trying to think about like doing a deep dive into some of the topics that I was really interested in. And at the start, it was, sort of the rise of the Prohibition Party in the United States, but it transformed into sort of this broader look at the way that third parties operate in the US. And it wasn't a conscious sort of, I'm going to do a paper about sort of the way that the particular political opportunity structure at the turn of the 20th century worked. It was more just sort of, train of thought notes and realizing the connections about what I was interested in, and then sort of slowly doing more and more research and developing this focus of research in sort of an ever narrowing shape. And I think that that's, there's many different ways to go about research that we'll talk about, but I think that sort of whatever process you go through, that finding what you're interested in and then going into it is really valuable, because not only does it build a lot of great skills that are super useful in whatever you do, whether that's finding applicable information, figuring out how to relate things in very disparate disciplines, whether it's insights you're having in your chemistry class and your government class and tying that together. But I also just think that it's really intrinsically valuable to understand what you as a person are really interested in and passionate about. And not only does that help you spend some large amount of time on the things that you find really enjoyable, but it's also going to inform your ability to take classes that you're going to be interested in, or make choices in graduate study or college that you're interested in, or find a job that you're interested in. And so I think that research allows you really to explore your passions and to narrow down on like very specific things that you can build something tangible on. And that's a pattern that's not just contained to research. It's something that you'll take to really anything that you do in your life.
So in a way, you are saying that research is fundamental to whatever you want to build upon, like whatever career you want to build or whatever you want to study further. And even if you are planning to chase a passion, the research can help you a lot.
Yeah, exactly. It builds the skills, as you mentioned, that's sort of vital to doing anything else. But then it also, gives you a directionality.
Yeah. How do you think that a researcher's mind, you are a student currently, you have been doing research, and then you have been also part of some sort of political activism. So do you think that these three heads think differently? And I get your point that a researcher mind helps you in everything, but do you think that these three minds think differently?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's, sort of different priorities depending on what you're doing. If I'm writing, a research paper, I'm probably more concerned about being super accurate than if I'm writing, copy for a political campaign, where it's more about rhetorical appeal. But I think that, even if you have sort of different goals in what you're doing, whether you're trying to convince versus you're trying to, find the truth and make a robust argument, the same thought processes, sort of go into both. And there's not sort of a different like fundamental way that my mind works if I'm going into these different disciplines. It's just channeling the skills that I've been able to build through research into different things. I mean, I can use a lot of the writing skills to write an academic paper, but I can also use that to write copy for a political campaign or mailers or flyers or whatever. And so it's different expressions, but it's still the same fundamental skill.
Correct. Got it. Thank you. So next question is, how has engaging in research influenced the way you approach learning and knowledge acquisition in general? Did your research experiences challenge or change any of your perspectives or beliefs?
Yeah. Well, so I think that one of the best things that research does intrinsically is that it recenters a lot of sort of the educational experience from things that you're just being told and that you sort of have to memorize or figure out how to analyze because somebody is telling you that you have to do that, to something that's really self-directed and you're interested in. Even if you're sitting in classes that you're passionate about and you're interested in, you're still following a set syllabus by the teacher, which I'm sure is very educational and is probably helpful for learning whatever the material it is that you're studying. But it doesn't help to build sort of this sense of like self-ownership of learning, which I think is really, really important. I think is an intrinsic good. And so, the way that I, now approach, not just research, but like the rest of my classes as well, has really been very changed by sort of my research focus, which is that, the running doc of sort of my thoughts and questions and things that I want to explore. I still do, in my college classes, but it's a lot more intentional and directional in that I'm looking for like very specific connections between what I'm learning and sort of what I'm interested in my research. And if I find something that is particularly particularly wrought with connections, then I might outside of class or outside of homework go down and start doing a lot more research on the subject. Or if there is a homework assignment that's very connected, I'm reading it for class theoretically, but I'm also, reading it for me. And I think that even in classes where, you're not able to find that connection, just having this view of learning as something that's like self-directed and something that, you can pick and be passionate about, especially in a college setting where you're picking most of your classes, and, you don't have too many requirements on you. I think not only, makes it a much more enjoyable process, because you don't really feel like you're being forced to do anything, but I think it also means that you learn more because, you can see, the connections between multiple disciplines, which I think is, incredibly valuable. And you can, you're really incentivized to go deeper into all of it. And so, my research in particular is on sort of party systems. And, party systems are something that, we have a lot of sort of cultural, theories about. Like lots of people, regardless of what political system you're in, people have very sort of set opinions about, what the way that politics, is and should work. There's all sorts of normative discussions all the time about the way the systems are meant to operate, and people playing fair and people not. And I think that one of the things that I learned, at least, through doing research, is that sort of a lot of these normative comments are, potentially valuable. I mean, there's a body of theoretical literature in any discipline that talks about what our normative values should be, but is sort of a separate question from what is. The is to ought bridge, is sort of difficult to navigate between. And so, separating yourself from, oh, well, this is how the political system should work, or it would be good if this happened, to, this is sort of the reality of the situation. And that extends across, sort of any discipline, whether it's, political science or history or the social sciences or the natural sciences. But yeah, so I think that just sort of in general, like this sort of engagement in research has led me to have sort of a more like information centered approach to learning, where I'm just sort of like interested in what I'm looking at. I'm interested in what I'm reading, and I'm interested in it sort of for its own sake and for figuring out what is actually going on, and not just sort of confirming pre-existing normative biases.
Got it. Very interesting. So the next question is, what long-term advantages do students gain by starting research activities before entering college? Because a lot of school students, mostly the school students, are listening to this conversation, and it's also going to be spread among them. So if you can shed some light on this question, that how it's going to help them in long term.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I think that starting research really as early as one can is sort of an incredibly great goal. I think that research, not only does research sort of give you all these intrinsic goods, like it recenters the way that you think about learning to being, much more self-directed, which I think is good. It gives you, a way to explore your passions and to figure out, what you're interested in, and it gives you a directionality for your study. But it also builds really important skills that you're going to need in college, right? Sort of the ability to engage in more self-directed learning, to take a problem and to figure out how to break it down, and how to look at the composite parts, and how to write a compelling piece that ties it together, is something that you'll be asked to do regularly in college. And it's something you're obviously have to do in high school as well. But in college in particular, there's sort of a lot less hand-holding of the process, and a lot more sort of expectation that you'll be able to take, oftentimes very broad prompts, and be able to engage in some sort of, very self-directed process where you have sort of like a theme, and you can write a paper about, any number of millions of things. And it's not, just responding to like one very simple prompt where it's obvious what you have to do. And so, having like a background of being able to do that and figuring out like, oh, like I know how to draw disparate things together. I know, what I'm interested in and how to look for connections to that thing. And I understand how to engage in a self-directed project. And I view learning in a way that is self-directed and conducive to this type of work. Not only, gives you, all sort of the intrinsic benefits that I mentioned, but really is sort of very instrumentally valuable in doing college work.
Got it. So how do you think early involvement in research can help in deciding on a college major or professional path?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that early involvement in research is really very important in terms of directionality, as I've talked about. And so this definitely informed at least a lot of the choices that I made. not just in terms of college major and profession path, but even like the college that I went to. Like as I mentioned, one of the ways that I settled on sort of like initially doing research in political systems, which I sort of a field that I sort of fell in love with, was just sort of these train of thought journal entries that like was from literally everything that I did, whether it was chemistry, government, the debate team, whatever, things that had absolutely nothing to do with political systems. And so, by realizing, what I was interested in, and I mean, like, there are other commonality themes that were sort of government related, but in figuring out what I was passionate about, that not only helped me, sort of do research on that, but it also informed, where I go to college. Like, so for instance, because I wanted to focus on political systems, I went to Hamilton, which is, a liberal arts college, which is, a vibe that I wanted, but out of sort of the liberal arts colleges in the Northeast, it was the best government department, and it has an open curriculum, which means that I could do like a super deep dive into what I'm interested in, which I figure out through my research is something that I really enjoy, which is taking one thing and going really deep into it. Not only that, like spending time on doing research allowed me to like actually confirm that it was something that I was interested in, because if you have a passion or a class you really like, that's not necessarily the same thing as wanting to spend 4 years in college or potentially even longer after that really focusing on that, right? And so doing research allows you to test out the discipline almost, and to figure out like, oh, is this something that I really enjoy? Is this something that I can have like self-sustained research and discussions on for length? And so I think that it's very important for choosing a college major, to make sure that you are going into something that you're interested in, and that you can excel at, and that will be long-term sustainable for you. And I think that translates really nicely to a professional path, because obviously sort of coming out of high school, beginning of college, when you start doing things like internships and summer research, if you're going into academia or whatnot, the things that you do in the summer and after school in college, can play a big part in career path. And so while it may seem like, oh, I just need to start thinking about career at the beginning of senior year when I apply to grad schools, or maybe start applying to some jobs, like you really do have to be thinking of that earlier on. And so if you don't come into college with sort of like a research background, I think that can, and with sort of already figuring out at least the directionality of where you want to go, I think that can put you at a disadvantage sometimes in doing sort of that early work for either whether it's like professional or graduate school.
Got it. Okay, so what steps should a high school student take when starting their first independent research project without having any prior knowledge or background? It's a very beginner type of question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that when you start like an independent research project, even if you want to start a research project, the focus shouldn't necessarily be on like the specific project, right? Like when I started doing like my first research on like the Prohibition Party, I didn't start out being like, oh, I don't really know anything about party structures, but I'm going to set out to answer the question of why the Prohibition Party is able to succeed without really electing anyone to Congress. Like that was not sort of the way that I started out, and I suspect that especially if you're starting out without any prior knowledge or background, the initial questions you're going to generate are probably not going to be very robust research questions. And so the way that I would encourage people to go about it, and the way that worked very well for me and a lot of the people that I know, is doing things like, the train of thought journaling, like focusing on like, what am I interested in, right? Like what questions am I having in the activities that I enjoy most, right? What do I want to learn more, right? Where am I, and how do I want to deeper that? Not in terms of like, particular questions to go and, start doing regressions on, but like, general broad fields. And then, asking yourself questions and going to, the library or finding online resources and, just sort of reading about it, reading a lot, trying to figure out more about it. And as you read sort of a lot more, and as you continue to research the things that are interesting to you, you'll sort of narrow in on something, right? You'll be like, oh, well, I'm interested in political opportunity structures. Let me go read about, sort of political opportunity structures in general. Like, oh, like the piece that most interested me was sort of the way that like a two-party system emerges in some countries, right? Like that was a really interesting article. Like why does that happen? Like let me go read more about that, right? Oh, I love this piece on like the way that third parties can still work. Like let me go read more about that. And so like as you just sort of do like rounds of sort of research and reading, you get closer and closer to like a very specific topic. And that'll also help you to develop a good research question, because it'll help you to see what sort of a gap in the current research is, right? Like, for instance, why do people tend to vote for the two parties in the United States is not a particularly good research question, because it's been answered by, sort of hundreds of articles and books. And so I think that, even if you did have a lot of background knowledge or prior knowledge, coming up with a research question at the start because of that isn't probably a particularly good strategy. And so I would recommend just sort of figuring out what you're interested in general, doing like a round of reading, whether that's just sort of at the library or, sort of a Google search that allows you to pull scholarly articles, and then what's interesting to you from there. Do another round and sort of like continue to narrow in until you like are at a place that you feel comfortable, like having a very set directionality.
Great. Okay, so next question. How important are curiosity and creativity in conducting meaningful research, especially at a young age? Can you share an example where thinking outside the box significantly advanced your research?
Absolutely. No, so I research, especially at the high school level, is very much about sort of just being curious, right? Because if you just are interested sort of in what's presented to you, then it's going to be very hard to sort of like find something meaningful that has not been already captured in a book or an article. And if it is, then you're sort of not really particularly doing research. You're more just summarizing the existing literature. And so being able to ask questions at every layer is very, very important. To do a round of reading, and instead of just being like, oh, well, that was all interesting, that all sounds about right, being able to sort of put articles in opposition to each other and say, well, but does that make any sense? Like, why aren't these two ideas contradictory? Or like, why is that true? A lot of these articles seem to make this baseline assumption. Like, is there a reason to believe that that's true? Like, sort of interrogating the sources that you're working with is very, very important, because that's the way that you find sort of these concentric rings of research, right? You do a round of research and you find something that doesn't make sense, or you find an underlying assumption that you're fascinated by, or you think, oh, well, this is super interesting. Like, I wonder what sort of like the broader implication of this is, right? And that's how you sort of like get down to a research question, and that's what can drive you. Because research is, if one is sufficiently dedicated, they could probably force themselves to do some large research project they're not particularly interested in. But that both sounds sort of challenging and also a very unenjoyable use of your time. And so having like something that you're genuinely curious about and genuinely passionate about makes research, a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable, because it's something that you're just interested in. So when you're reading it, it's not homework. It's not sort of a chore. You're actually fascinated. You actually want to know more. And I think that sort of like this out of the box thinking especially comes into play when you're looking at things that sort of cross various disciplines. Like, for instance, I'm doing research right now on sort of the way that we measure third-party success in countries like the United States that don't have a lot of third parties. And so there's essentially these two disciplines in third-party studies, though they're not particularly well defined, which is like the study of third parties in systems that are like multi-party systems that like have a lot of third parties that actually win seats in the government. And then that study of third parties in systems like the United States that are not, that's a sort of a very dominant two-party system. And so I was originally planning on writing a paper on sort of a mechanization of sort of like the quantitative study of these parties, like how exactly you can mechanize quantitatively their success. But I kept running up against this problem in the literature, which is that like the way that current studies mechanize their success seemed totally geared to like multi-party systems and not two-party systems. And how there seem to be these like two different strands of study that I just articulated in the qualitative literature, but that the quantitative literature didn't address this at all. And so because of that, I pivoted my research project right now to working on like a paper that's like very cleanly defining sort of these two different like political opportunity structures and mechanizing out sort of a quantitative way to study third parties in the one that's being underserved. And if I hadn't been sort of trying to, very much interrogate the sources that I was working with and say like, but that doesn't make sense, right? Like, that's not the method you should be using here. Like, these are different cases. Like, why are you lumping them together? Like, why are we doing this? Then, not only would I not be doing sort of the research that I'm doing right now that I find more interesting anyway, but also I probably would have written a significantly worse paper, because I would have, sort of continued to propagate a lot of these problems that already exist in the literature. And so, I'm on a totally different track right now because I was sort of able to make that connection. And I think that is very emblematic of the way that sort of that source interrogation can make your research so much better.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so does conducting and publishing research during high school give applicants a significant advantage in the college admission process?
Yeah,
What do you
I think it certainly does. So I mean, I think that there's sort of like a bit of like, so I think there's a like sort of three ways that it gives you an advantage. The first is just sort of in an increasingly competitive college landscape, right? The margin sort of difference between, you know, rejected and waitlist or waitlist and accepted can often be, you know, pretty small. And so having something that a lot of high school students don't do, like research, can make you stand out. That being said, though, I think that that's probably sort of the smallest impact that it has, because I think really the impact of research is that it shows colleges that you're the type of student who is not only going to succeed in college, because this types of students who are doing research in high school, who are like motivated and interested enough in a question in a field to do all this research, to find out like something specifically that makes them tick, to go all in on it, to you know, not for a grade or for a class or because they're your teacher is standing over them, but like because of their own sort of self-directed interest to go and do this research. Like those are the types of students who succeed in college. And I mean, we've already sort of talked about like the general benefits that it gives you in college, and you know, that's not something that you know, I made some unique discovery there. You know, colleges are very much aware that students who do this type of thing are successful in college. So, you know, when you have that on your college application, you know, even sort of above grades and test scores, which are something that, you know, students, even if they're not particularly self-directed, if they're, you know, smart and good at studying and all of that, you know, they can make, you know, good scores and good grades. But research is a way to show that, you know, not only are you smart, you're also self-directed. You're also the type of person who's going to succeed in sort of a less hand-holdy environment, especially in most colleges, you know, in the world. And so they really like that. And then I think just sort of the third thing is a lot of people come into college without really having sort of a directionality of what they want to do. And that leads to them, you know, not, you know, particularly well taking advantage of the college's resources. I mean, a lot of people come into college and don't really know what they do and, you know, take good advantage of it. But a lot of people, when they don't, you know, sort of have a major in mind, they don't really have a particular career academic path in mind, you know, they just sort of take some classes and then, like, you know, maybe they'll discover in sophomore year and they have to declare their major, that they have, you know, enough credits for, you know, some major, and you know, that's what they decide to do. And so there's not sort of a lot of very intentional taking advantage of the college's resources. And colleges want students who are going to do that, who are going to add to their community in different ways. Like they want students who are all interested in different things, and students who are all, you know, going to excel at what they do, and students who are going to build a campus culture, you know, that is sort of very, you know, academic and in line with sort of making sure that the school as a whole has this intellectual culture that, you know, everyone is sort of contributing to the culture and everyone's taking advantage of it. And doing research shows you'll do that. It shows that you on your own will contribute to an intellectual and academic culture. And it also shows that because you're coming into college with this focus, you're going to take advantage of the resources relating to it, right? You've already taken advantage of the resources in high school related to what you're interested in, right? You take advantage of going to the library and researching this on your own. So you're probably going to go to the events in college that are related to it. You're probably going to do summer research with the professors there. So I think that, like, you know, in many ways, colleges really like it when you have experience in research at the high school level.
Great. Okay, how do top universities perceive independent research projects compared to structured programs or internships?
Yeah. So I think independent research projects have a lot more variability in terms of how universities think about them. Because structured programs or internships is sort of like very much a known quantity, right? You know, obviously there are different types of internships, different types of programs, but they are all to some extent you doing something, and like someone is sort of telling you what to do, and you know, you are, you know, participating in whether like it's an academic program or a job setting that is, you know, sort of not particularly self-directed, right? And so on one hand, this means that universities know that you're actually doing something, and that you've actually, you know, taken something away from it, whether it's skills, or whether, you know, it's just sort of the environment that you were in. They probably know something about you just from like what you chose. But it also means that, you know, it can't really be an experience, or it's hard to make it an experience that's like super impressive, super self-directed, super like, you know, oh wow, you know, he or she's such a go-getter, you know, they went out and, you know, did all these, you know, sort of amazing, impressive stuff. Not that you can't do that, you know, obviously there's some variability in these programs. You know, there are programs where you can, I'm sure, do very little, and there's programs I'm sure that you can spin it into a lot of independent success. But it's because it's structured, it has a much lower variability. whereas independent research projects have much higher variability. Independent research projects, because there's no one like, signing off, no one really watching you, even if you have sort of an advisor that's helping. Independent research projects very much could just be a student like not really doing anything. But on the other side of the bell curve, it very much could be a student who's like pouring like 2 years of their high school life into something that they're fascinated by and spending nights at the library and doing, sort of an incredible amount more work than, even sort of like the top internships, and is doing something that they're really passionate about and writing something amazing. And so I think that, to the extent in your college application that you can convey that the latter is true, which I think isn't particularly hard. In college applications, you'll have personal statements and you'll have the ability to sort of talk about your research and your passion, especially in the supplemental essays. If you can convey that, like, no, like this was like a real independent research project. This is something that I really am like fascinated by. It's something that, I spent a really long time on. I produced this amazing work. Maybe I even got it published, right? If you are able to convey that, which is not particularly hard to do, then it'll certainly weigh above, sort of structured programs.
Okay, moving on to next question. How important is it for students to pursue research area they are passionate about versus topics they think will impress colleges?
Yeah, so you very much should not focus on impressing college in your research project selection. There are, first of all, like pretty much anything that you can do research on is an academic field of study, right? Like even, there's not a lot of examples I can think of. Like even like I've read, in my Anthro 100 course, we had, sort of a very well-respected paper in anthropology that was assigned to us that's about like chat interactions of like teenagers on sort of like video games, right? So like things do not have to be, particularly academic sounding for them to be research areas, right? If it's an area in which you can like read existing literature and scholarly articles and books on it, and in which you can do like any sort of rigorous qualitative or quantitative analysis on it, like there is an academic field for that. So there's not, there's not really anything that like is research that is, would not fit into an academic field if sort of phrased the right way and conducted in the right way. But more importantly, I think sort of on like first, like colleges can tell if, especially with the admissions team, can tell if this is something you're just doing to like impress them, because they're going to want to talk to you about your research experience in like interviews, or they're going to expect you to have like a supplemental essay written about it, or potentially to write your Common App essay about it. And it's gonna come through if you don't care about it, because I could talk on end, like I could probably talk literally forever about the research that I'm interested in, because I just have like so much to say about it. The research that I've been forced to do for classes, not forced to do, but the research that I've had to do for classes for a grade, I could talk to you for like 5 minutes about it, and then like that's a little it, and it would not be very exciting or interesting for either of us, right? And so college admissions officers are going to see that too. They're going to see that in your writing. They're going to see that in your interviews. And so, so I think like on one hand, there's not really like research areas that are going to like, impress colleges more than others, because, anything that's real research can fit into an academic discipline of some sort. But on the other, like you should pick something that you're interested in, because colleges will be able to see that you're interested in it. They are not going to, sort of very much appreciate an independent research project that's like just for the purpose of getting into college, because that undermines the whole reason that they like independent research projects in the college admissions process. And also, if you're just doing something that like you think they're interested in, your work product is going to be worse because you're going to want to spend less time on it, and you like might not even be able to finish it. So like, it's just not really worth it.
Got it. What strategies do you recommend for selecting a research topic that aligns with one's passion? You have already mentioned about this, but if you want to add something.
Yeah, well, I would just say sort of like going back to the sort of narrowing down, I think it's important to start like from a broad base of like sort of all the things that you're interested in, and not like just jumping immediately into like one thing. Not only because it like helps you with sort of like research methodology and like making sure you're like selecting a good research question, but like I think it really is important to think about all of the things that you're doing. And like the fact that my political science or my party system focus came out of sort of like looking at the notes I was taking in biology class, as well as history, as well as government, I think is not just happenstance. Like I think it really was important for me to take a look at like, what am I thinking in all of the different things that I do, right? Because you don't want to miss, not only do you not want to miss like a passion that could be like potentially really interesting to do a research project in, but you don't want to miss like a connection that you have to other disciplines that could make your project a lot better. So, I've already talked a lot about this, but I would just say like, stay broad at the top, right? Like when you're starting this, like really look at everything. Like don't be too quick to narrow down.
And do you think it is also important to look into the gaps, maybe something that has not been researched upon, or there is a gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's what's really important about sort of like as you go down sort of the concentric rings of research and like really interrogating the sources. Like that's how you can find the gaps, being like, well, these two, these two theories like are contradictory, and like no one seems to have reconciled them, right? Or like, why are we using this methodology here? That doesn't make any sense. Or like, this is wrong. Like that's just like factually not true. Like I can prove that's not true, right? Like that, those types of interrogations are very much how you find those gaps. And so yeah, like I think that that's very much the focus of sort of like the lower level once you've sort of like already moved through.
Correct. Okay. Could you share any tips for students aiming to publish their work, such as selecting journals or preparing manuscripts?
Yeah. So I think that the most important thing here is working with sort of a teacher or a professor who can help you sort of navigate the process. Because one of the most important things sort of about high school research and publishing and all of that is not necessarily, just to stick some line in your college application that's like, oh, publish in whatever journal, but really to get the experience of going through the process. As I've sort of talked about at length, I think it's very intrinsically and instrumentally good. And so I think that it will really be helpful to have someone not only who can sort of talk about like the journals in your area, because especially at the high school level, journals tend to be very sort of like, community or even school specific, although, like there's national journals in, most large nations for sort of this type of thing. And so, I'm sure your teachers will probably have a much better idea of like the particular publishing landscape, for you, and like in particular for your field, because like it looks different for a lot of different fields. I know what it looks like in my area for political science, and that's sort of about it. But like your teacher will very much be able to help you with that. But like also just sort of like going through the process of like, oh, like getting advice on like your writing and being able to integrate comments, right? Being able to like hear someone's feedback and like use that productively to like write a manuscript that's better, right? And hearing like, oh, like your teacher telling you, well, here's like the convention, right? For writing, like here's what I like to do, right? Because that'll differ from discipline to discipline, and so like there's no one-stop source for all of that information. There's not sort of like a document that I can share that's just like, well, here's how you write a paper, because like what a paper is like vastly different among the different disciplines. And so like having someone who can like help you is not only like functionally helpful in finding journals and stuff, but it makes the process a lot more sort of educational and intrinsically valuable, and builds a lot of skills like that.
Basically, having a research mentor is something very important.
Yeah.
Okay, great. What advice do you have for students who feel overwhelmed by the idea of starting a research project? How do they simplify?
Yeah. So I think that when you start a research project, you shouldn't, unless you're sort of like already, in a research field and you know exactly what you're going to do next, you shouldn't think about it as sort of like, oh, well, I'm starting a research project, like I've got to fit my research question. Like you should think about it in terms of like, I'm interested in this type of thing. This type of thing is interesting. Let me go and read a lot about that, right? And then let me think about what I read and like what in that group interests me, what in that group puzzles me, what do I have more questions about? And then let me go read those stuff, right? So a lot of it, a lot of sort of like the narrowing down is, not even sort of this particularly active process. It's just sort of like, reading. I mean, you should be actively reading and taking it in, but it's, reading and figuring out, what you're interested in and why things do and don't make sense. And then, reading more along those lines. And if you do that, that will sort of like slowly narrow down your focus. And then you'll find after doing a lot of this, like, oh, like this is what I want to look into, right? And so, I think that this sense of overwhelming can come from like looking at like, oh, here are all of the things that I'm interested in. Here's all of the scholarship that has ever existed in the world. Like what am I going to write? But that's sort of I think that that's setting yourself up to feel overwhelmed. Whereas if you allow it to happen a lot more naturally and narrow and naturally, then, you're not going to feel overwhelmed because you'll get to a research question eventually and then you'll be good.
Great. Okay, what role has technology, particularly AI tools, played in shaping academic research for young researchers, and what are the ethical considerations of using these tools in research practices? Nowadays, ChatGPT can give a lot of information, but whether it is right, wrong, can you throw some light?
Yeah. So Okay, so AI can be useful in that, like, I think that AI is useful in that it can help you work out ideas. One of the things that I like to do with it is a lot of the AI models now, like ChatGPT and Claude, can process PDFs. So after I read an article that I think is like particularly important to my research project, I like to feed it into ChatGPT and then have like a debate with it. And be like, well, these are my takeaways sort of from the article. Like, this is where I think the article lacks. Like, just disagree with me, right? Like, give me reasons why I'm wrong. And then sort of have a debate with it. And like, ChatGPT often makes things up and should not be taken as like a marker for truth. But I think that artificial intelligence can be helpful to help you sort of like refine like your own thoughts, right? Not to take ChatGPT's thoughts, right? ChatGPT's thoughts are often like not great, which is in particular why I would recommend having ChatGPT play the opposition, right? Where you're not asking ChatGPT for insights into it, you're not asking it for to like tell you what to think. You just sort of ask it to like poke holes in what you think, so that like you can build up, sort of a better conception of whatever it is that you're doing. And I think that that can be useful in the same way that like if you can like coerce your friend into like reading the article, then having a debate with you, that can be useful as well. But ChatGPT and these AI tools should certainly not be used as a research tool in terms of like asking it like what is true, because not only can ChatGPT not be cited, like you cannot be like, oh, well, there's a hole in the research because ChatGPT tells me this, and that's contradictory with this other thing that Claude told me. Like that will not be helpful at all. But it also frequently makes things up. Like it will make papers up. It will make arguments up. It will make theories up. And you don't want to discover like 6 months into your project that you are like fixing a gap in the literature that like does not exist because ChatGPT hallucinated it. So I would say, don't use it for like research, but it can be a useful tool for just sort of like talking about things.
Got it. Any last piece of advice you would give to high school, college students interested in research? Are there any resources or networks you recommend for students to get started in research?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I would recommend that we haven't touched on already is that it's really useful to like be doing this type of thing with other people. Not necessarily that you have to sort of be interested in the same thing. Obviously, everyone should pursue their passions and they have different things. But having, friends or mentors or whatever that are sort of going through the same process, even if it's like, vastly different things, can help like both of you, because it can help both of you if you talk about it. It can help you see connections that you might have missed. It can help you talk through problems. It can help you, sort of like push back against your ideas and make them better. And it can also help you, stay motivated and stay accountable, because these research projects, because they are individual, there's no one, looking over your shoulder. There's no grade. Often, they have a tendency to get pushed to the wayside, and you have a tendency, not to prioritize them. But having sort of a network of people around you who are doing sort of the same thing helps to keep you all on track. There are also sort of like online, resources and networks for like whatever your particular field is. I can share sort of like one for political science, but like I guarantee like whatever your field is, anthropology, political science, biology, whatever, I guarantee that there's like a Discord server or an email listserv or something with high school and college students who are interested in the same thing. And, oftentimes there's these, forums exist for like very specific fields, and that can help to do the same thing as well. Not only can you know people who are coming up in your field, but you can, give each other ideas and push back on each other's research and hold each other accountable. And so I would really just recommend finding a community that you can do it with, whether it's in person or whether it's online.
Okay, so now we will open the question answer session for participants. I think Shirish has raised his hand. Shirish, can you type your question here so that I can ask, if you don't mind? In the meanwhile, I can ask the question.
Okay, sir. I am typing it.
Okay. So in the meanwhile, I am asking the question by Principal Doon International School. So he's asking, he has two questions. First question is, are we looking at preparedness of justifying why a student wishes to do a course, or are we looking at research skills to be honed from the school level for self-directed and ownership of learning, or both ways?
Yeah. I mean, so I think that research really has sort of this dual purpose, as sort of you get to. Like research does really help with ownership of learning, with recentering how you think about the academic process, with making yourself more self-directed. But it also does build like real, actual, valuable instrumental skills that will help you in college, that will help you in sort of advanced courses in high school. And I'm not sure that the two can really be divorced. Like, students may be more interested in one than the other. There may be a student who really wants to do it because they want to take a particular course in college, or they might really want to do it because they are just sort of passionate about the topic. And so like for some students, one may be more important than the other. But I'm not sure that they really can or should be divorced, because like they don't come at the expense of each other. There's not really any trade-offs to be made. And they're both like very powerful impacts of doing high school research.
Got it. Yes. So second question he has asked, college admissions depend on timely applications, scores, certain grade points, qualifying exam clearance, and personal statement. Hence, what is the relevance of research here? Does it have a direct correlation with college admissions? Although you have touched upon this, but would you like to give a quick answer to this?
Yeah, of course. I would say that like, especially for a lot of the top colleges, most of their applicants, right, meet sort of their minimum criteria. Most of their applicants have good grades, have good test scores, qualify through exams, whatever, right? But when you can show that you have sort of a particular interest, that you are a self-directed learner, that you would fit well into the academic community, that you have a particular niche that you're interested in, when you can show that you've had good experiences, like that can set you apart, right? And, unfortunately, it's not, especially like at a lot of colleges in the US, which is sort of my experience with the admissions process, it's not really just sort of like whoever has, the best amalgamation of GPA, SAT, personal statement gets in. Like it really is sort of about standing out in the process, and doing college research can really help to do that by showcasing sort of all the positive benefits that we've talked about for the last 45 minutes.
Okay, so, thanks for this. And then Shirish, he wants to know what should be the length of research paper, and should we choose topic which are more advanced, or it may be any for college application?
Yeah. So I think that when starting out sort of research, you shouldn't be, sort of beginning with sort of questions about like length of the paper or like the advancedness of the topic. You should just be sort of thinking about like what you're interested in doing, sort of like a deep dive in it. Because like both of these two things are like very modular and can be changed like pretty late in the process, right? I think that also both of them are like very context dependent. Like if you want to publish in a particular journal, like the length of the research paper will be very dependent on what they want, right? And how advanced it should be is going to be very dependent on like at the point at which you're making this decision, like how equipped you are to do whatever type of analysis you want to do. And like both of them are pretty modular, right? Like if you're doing a bunch of research into like for instance, party politics, for me, like I could write like a 2-page paper on like that tomorrow. I'm also currently working on like a 40-page version of that, right? And so like, I mean, obviously they're vastly different papers, but like how deep you go into the material and like how advanced your like analysis is, for instance, is like a sliding scale that can be done at the point at which you're actually writing the paper. But when you're sitting down to write the paper, you've already done, you're iterating through writing throughout the research process, and you're like continuing to read throughout it. But the point at which you're sort of like seriously considering this, you've already done like most of the research, or you've already done like enough of the research to have a solid foundation. And so I think that like that's not really sort of a particularly relevant question at the outset. And, whenever you do have to make that decision, it'll depend more on sort of like contextual factors, like where you want to get it published, or like how equipped you feel to tackle sort of more advanced analysis that isn't like a one size fits all.
Great, it makes sense. Anyone else? Anyone from Dune International Group? Any student from there, or anyone else wants to ask any question? Hi, Ajit sir.
No, sir, there is no question.
Okay, so we will then close the session, and I sincerely thank Teddy for detailed insights which you presented and answered all our questions. So thank you so much, and thanks for doing this early morning of your time. So we really appreciate your time and commitment for this, Teddy. Thanks a lot.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Great, thank you so much. The students are clapping for you for all your wisdom and experience that you shared. So we really appreciate this. Thank you.
Perfect.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.